Jake Paul is getting sued for more than $100 million by Eddie Hearn. So let's check this out. Eddie Hearn is suing YouTuber turned boxer Jake Paul for more than $100 million after his outrageously false claims that Matchroom paid a judge in Anthony Joshua's defeat by Alexander Usyk. Now, here's the thing: the problem that makes this really interesting is that it is very widely known how corrupt the boxing industry actually is. There's been many times, and I believe many people who have actually been found guilty for bribery, taking bets, like very like shady kind of like backroom type of stuff dealing with boxing. So it wouldn't necessarily be surprising that there is more corruption in the boxing industry. And what's a little bit funny is that it seems hard to be able to sue a public figure while you are also a public company about a public statement and basically their opinion, right? Because the thing is, I mean, to prove defamation, and especially for this type of money, it's like I I don't think there's really going to be anything coming out of this, right? I don't know why they're doing this, but they're not probably going to get any sort of money for this. So Hearn has taken exception to outrageously false and baseless allegations by Paul on September 20th, in which he claimed the Englishman's company had paid a judge on more than one occasion. Matchroom are now seeking over 100 million in damages, and in a statement to DailyMail.com, Hearn's attorney, Frank Salzono, said, both legally and ethically, there is a clear line separating opinion from defamatory lies. Jake Paul knows that, and he purposely crossed that line when he wrongly accused Matchroom Boxing and Eddie Hearn of fixing fights. Let's see. Nonetheless, he was still given an opportunity to retract his defamatory statements and refused to. Now he will face the legal consequences of his actions, as Matchroom and Mr. Hearn will be seeking damages well in excess of $100 million, given the value and goodwill attached to the Matchroom business and the harmful nature of Mr. Paul's comments. Now, here's the thing, though, right? Because hasn't it been multiple times where Eddie Hearn, his company, all that kind of stuff would talk bad about Paul and basically say that pretty much Paul is worthless or whatever? So, can you really make statements putting down basically the power of Jake Paul that he has in terms of his popularity, and then you just try to go to sue him as if like his words are now powerful due to his massive audience and the attention that he brings that you tried to belittle earlier. And again, there is a thing called free speech where you can make claims that you believe, right? You have the right to pretty much say whatever you want. Like, this isn't like I think this would be different if Jake Paul lived in a different country. But Jake Paul lives in America, and I don't really know how well a defamatory lawsuit would actually do. So Paul made inflammatory comments to IFL TV that Hearn had paid off Judge Glenn Feldman, who is one of the three referees for Anthony Joshua and Alexander Usyk's rematch. Glenn Feldman shows up in Saudi and scores Anthony Joshua to win the fight when everyone who watched the fight said it was not a split decision, he said. This judge, Glenn Feldman, gives it to the Anthony Joshua is like a repeated crime here. It's BS, Paul said. Clearly, this guy is being paid by Matchroom Boxing, and that's a bold statement and an accusation that I don't take lightly. But it's just blatantly obvious, and they're not even trying to hide it. The repeated crime, Paul alleges, refers not only to Joshua Usyk, but to a previous fight in which Hearn and Paul co-promoted. Feldman scored the Amanda Serrano bout with Katie Taylor in favor of the Irish fighter in their April undisputed title bout. Serrano is a part of the Americans MVP stable. Their American judge controversially scored the Usyk Joshua fight 115 to 113 in favor of the Brit, despite the other two judges having Usyk ahead, with the Ukrainian ultimately retaining the WBA, Super, WBO, and IBF titles with a split decision victory. Speaking on the Matchroom Boxing YouTube channel Thursday, Hearn said what he said in terms of his allegations of corruption with Glenn Feldman is totally unacceptable. We all have a laugh with Jake and he's an average fighter, but I'm telling you now, what he said is unacceptable and will be dealt with because we take this sport, our values as a family seriously, and we love the sport of boxing. So for him to come out with idiotic comments without even thinking of what he said is extremely harmful to me and very disrespectful to us as a business and as a family. The pair have enjoyed a series of back and forth verbal spars in recent months, but this time Paul has seemingly crossed the line. I'm not prepared as I would be on many occasions to take what he is saying with a pinch of salt on this occasion because it's bang out of order and totally disrespectful to the sport of boxing and to me and us. But see, this is the funny thing though, right? Because how's it disrespectful to the sport of boxing when boxing has a history of massive corruption? Like massive corruption. Like, it's not being disrespectful to boxing. To be frank, boxing was basically on a downward spiral for years. Years. Like, hardly anyone cared about boxing anymore other than the Tyson fight, right? Tyson Fury. Like, other than, like, his fights, no one really cared about boxing. So he told seconds out later in the day, we're not effing around here because I found it very offensive. So basically, this is an ego play. An ego play. And this is the thing. If you sue someone for defamation, they could easily countersue you for making basically a baseless accusation against them. Like basically, I believe if someone files a lawsuit against you, you could countersue them for basically bringing up this thing falsely, right? But not only that, if Eddie Hearn loses his lawsuit, he's going to have to pay Jake Paul's legal fees. And I don't know how much money Eddie Hearn has or his company has, but I don't know. It's going to be pretty interesting. It's going to be interesting because I don't think people realize just how serious it could get when people start basically tossing out these things just because their ego is hurt. Like, I feel like if Eddie Hearn is not careful, his company and himself might be losing a lot of money in legal fees for no reason just because of his ego, right? Like that's I feel like that's just like a really stupid move to make. And the thing is, this is just going to bring more attention to Jake Paul. This is going to probably make Jake Paul more popular or have more eyes on Jake Paul, which in turn, even if he were to truly get sued and worst case scenario actually ends up losing the lawsuit, which probably won't work, also won't ever end up actually paying a full $100 million amount, he's going to end up making even more money throughout his career because this is just going to keep bringing more and more and more attention to Jake Paul. Like the thing is, like if Eddie Hearn really disliked Jake Paul to the extent that it seems like he does, you would do everything in your power to simply ignore Jake Paul. You wouldn't make basically a scandal and then make the person's popularity end up growing because of the scandal. Now, it could also be getting played like this, where Eddie Hearn might be doing this lawsuit to actually more so, well, one, because of the ego thing. He feels like his ego's, he's just been disrespected or whatever. But then he might be doing it to try to get more attention on him and his own company so that he himself could end up making more money, even if he were to fail with his lawsuit. Which, again, I don't think his lawsuit's really going to end up bearing any sort of fruit, right? Because, again, this isn't like Jake Paul lives in the UK or lives in Canada. Because, like, in Canada, you probably could end up suing someone like this for defamation. But in America, you have to do some pretty in-depth proving of true insidious acts of basically purposely defaming someone, like out of like malicious intent. But him just basically saying like, "Oh, this is BS. This is totally obviously a bribe or something like that." That is just speech. And Jake Paul lives in America, so I don't think this is going to bear really any fruit at all, except for grow Jake Paul's popularity, good or bad. But it'll keep growing and growing and growing. Eddie Hearn's company will probably decrease in value, decrease in popularity, because the way that a lot of people are probably going to look at this is like, oh, Eddie Hearn is kind of a baby and can't even take comments that might sound disrespectful to his ears. Like he can't take comments that will affect his ego. Like that's just like kind of lame. But feel free to give your thoughts if you stumble upon this.